Yeah, like I said, thanks for joining. I'm here to talk about kind of Insurtech and cyber liability. Uh, the kind of the catchphrase is where insurance and technology meet because it's exactly that. Um, so from myself, this is really again the obligatory bio. Got to go through. So I'm Mike Cavanaugh. I'm again probably the only person here that does not actively work in the technology industry, but I do have a bit of a tech background, kind of. Um, I went to school for insurance, but started life out as a computer science major, and kind of got involved in cybersecurity back in grade school when I got caught cracking passwords with AOL using a little program called Sabotage by my parents. They didn't exactly appreciate it, but kind of stuck with it. And a couple of years ago, and this is how I got connected with Bucks. A couple of years ago, I joined one of Matt Frederickson's classes, and I got certified as a certified ethical hacker. Um, it's kind of because my specialty was cyber liability, it adds a little bit of a nice spin on it. And I've been kind of lucky to be able to join a lot of these conversations and conferences because I can kind of see where the language and everything joins up. One thing that did allow me to do was get involved in some emerging areas, specifically early stage companies, interesting stuff, cyber liability in particular, and Insurtechs. All right, so you probably guessed it. Insurtech is just a combination of insurance and technology. Pretty easy. I mean, before there was Insurtech, there was fintech, health tech, whatever interesting industry it was that they got in technology involved. They just combined the two words and called it a day. That said, each word kind of has a lot of meaning behind it. There's a lot of emotion or feelings behind everything. In particular, when it comes to insurance, it's generally boring. People think of car insurance, and all they think of, for the most part, at least I get questions all the time, is about Jake from State Farm. So whether or not we work with State Farm, if I find those commercials funny, what have you. I don't work in that type of insurance. I'm proud to say I work in what I call the cool and interesting type of insurance that's to do with things like cyber liability, kidnap and ransom, all the interesting stuff. You always have to include kidnap and ransom because that one's interesting. But on the flip side, conversely, when we think about technology, it's always fun, new, and then obviously Mr. Robot. It's the one that got brought up every single time I was in class with Matt for the Certified Ethical Hacker and getting the CEH. We would devote at least 5 minutes every class to talking about Mr. Robot. So I had to start watching it. But to kind of just started off with the actual insurance side. So the old school insurance, insurance is old. To put it plainly, some of these insurers are over 300 years old. In particular, this picture in the background here is a company called Lloyd's of London. Not entirely an insurer, but it's really complex, so I won't jump into that. But everything's done face-to-face at those desks you see in the background. They work from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., and then they go to the pub. Sometimes they don't even come back from lunch, but that's old school insurance. It's conservative in nature. It's slow to adapt. They do everything they can to avoid risk and try to find as interesting ways as possible while still focusing on the historical data. On the other hand, the insurtechs, right, they focus on disrupting everything. It's all about speed, efficiency, finding new ways to distribute things, bringing in the emerging technology like artificial intelligence. We've got innovation, agility, data analytics, all of those combined, help these companies find new ways of innovating process of buying, reducing expenses through AI, increasing efficiency through various algorithms, what have you. Whatever buzzword you want to use, they're latching onto it to try and get venture capital money and find a different way of attacking a problem that most people don't want to deal with. It's not fun to go buy insurance. But for some insurtechs, the priority is definitely to innovate in ways that just something that just didn't exist. For example, one company that I work with, and my company Boost, I'm not trying to always take a step back from the companies that we currently work with, but from Boost, what we do is help bring these innovative ideas to the table, bring a program live, these creative things that just didn't exist. One company we work with came up with the idea of paid parental leave insurance. Totally new type of insurance product, doesn't exist. So we built it from the ground up. We created the policy form, the rates, basically accumulated as much data as you can possibly find. I learned a lot about the average age of when men and women have children, and where it fits in their lives and all that good stuff, whatever. But the social benefit of that and that innovation was pretty clear. And hopefully companies see the benefit of that because it's live now. But for our purposes, big Insurtech products that have really taken over are cyber liability, right? That's the number one area. And you'll see the companies on here: Corvus, Cowbell, Coalition, At Bay. These are all companies that have focused on the emerging risk of cyber liability. They also delve into, the industry itself jumps into the crypto and blockchain, things like parametric insurance, which is a really interesting type of insurance in that it pays people instantly. If there's a loss, the money just goes into your bank account. It's designed to cover extreme events, major events, incorporates a lot of data and analyzing that data and processing everything, usually tied to weather, but it's starting to include cyber liability, cyber exposures, and pandemics, as you can imagine, based on the current state of affairs. But for our purposes today, I'll use cyber liability as the example. Just because, again, that's my background, where I come from, and what I've been selling for 12 years, so I hope that I know a decent amount about it. But to cyber liability, the one thing I always like to make clear when I talk about cyber is that, it's almost a rose by any other name. Data breach insurance, security and privacy, cyber risk, cyber liability, they all mean the same thing, right? Whatever name it is, it's pretty much referring to the same thing. A lot of companies slap their own name on it, call it something, and hope that it sticks. That when I first started selling cyber 12 years ago, I really thought privacy liability was going to stick. No such luck. I was kind of riding that horse for a while, but unfortunately, stuck with cyber. It caused a lot of confusion with people because everybody thought it had everything to do with what was online, which isn't necessarily the case. But the general consensus or the unifying factor is that the coverage just exists to protect businesses for cyber events, right, at the core of it. So kind of the big, kind of what those cyber events are is really cyber extortion, ransomware, data breaches, cybercrime and social engineering. From the extortion and the ransomware side, you've seen things like WannaCry. And we just came across the 4-year anniversary of WannaCry. It was actually the day my cousin got married, so I usually try to latch onto that one and figure out when it is. But beyond that, I was sitting at the hotel in Philly, and I popped this thing, and I felt like I was missing something that only really mattered in the insurance world and technology. But it really led to kind of a rise of different industries, like ransomware as a service. Most recently, Universal Health Services got hit with a ransomware event. It's the largest, supposedly or potentially the largest healthcare ransomware event in history. Across the country, 400 individual. The ramifications could be pretty significant. A couple weeks ago, a hospital got hit with some ransomware and somebody died. It's kind of the first time that we've seen something, a cyber exposure, permeate into or leak into the kind of the physical world and affect somebody in a really serious way and result in a death. But traditionally, it comes down to the data breaches. Everybody remembers Target, they remember Home Depot, they remember all the interesting ones that made the news. What we don't realize is that there's a lot of small organizations that have data breaches that have to adhere to state regulations. You've got things like the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA, and every state now has its own kind of individual legislation. But it all comes back to the money. Cybercrime and social engineering are the most recent kind of events that have risen to the top, just because it's a way to chase the money. There's not as much of a heavy lift as there is with data breaches. In the case of extortion and ransomware, you've got to be able to interact with, whether it's, build something from the ground up or, modify something like your own variant of ransomware. Data breaches, you've got to be able to get into somebody's system, get into their database, and find a way to monetize that data. Those are big, heavy lifts. Those are both. That takes a lot of skill, takes some time, investment, whereas cybercrime and social engineering, it's a matter of sending out an email, trying to convince somebody that your boss is on the golf course and needs to transfer $54,000 worth of, Android gift cards or something like that across the board. I mean, that's as simple as the basic call that we all get or the emails that we all get, right? I mean, really, those are the ones that are coming up using the PII, the personally identifiable information that is accumulated in those data breaches and other public resources. So OSINT, so open source, information, whatever's available online, people will use that information. It gives them a lot of freedom. I mean, the big targets right now are real estate agents, accountants, and nonprofits that generally sit on decent bank accounts, with large sums that, generally get involved in some frequent transfers of large sums of money. Also, schools get hit generally in the summer just because there's nobody there. They're not working. I've seen that kind of pop up in the time. But I mean, the real big point on that is that you're also looking at real estate accountants and schools are people that interact with technology, especially schools as of late. They're heavily involved in different aspects of the fintech industry, health tech, edutech, whatever you want to use. Again, whatever industry you want to slap the word tech onto. So that's kind of where we tie in with the kind of the insurance, but from the technology side, what actually makes it the tech is this. I mean, what's going on specific to cyber, again, is people are incorporating where traditional underwriting has been, everything on a paper application. If you've ever filled out an actual paper application for cyber liability or general liability, property, it's awful. It's all manual. You're sitting there trying to figure out, you're checking with somebody to get the right answers because these are legal contracts. They're usually 10 pages long and require some sort of in-depth knowledge of network infrastructure to complete correctly, right? It took some time, but eventually kind of the industry started to understand that people don't know this stuff. If you have to actually go out and talk to ThinkGeek to figure out how to fill out a paper application, it's on the industry to make something easier. So what we've done is to get people involved who actually understand technology. About 4 years ago, the first fintech or first insurtechs really jumped into the marketplace. A company called Coalition, their logo was on there, really jumped into the space with a technology background. And full disclosure, I'm good friends with the CEO of Coalition. He and I, this is after I got my CEH, so he and I bonded over this and having these conversations that he typically doesn't get to have in insurance. He actually, one of those people, built a company, sold it at 15, worked for Microsoft, worked for the NSA and the CIA, and started Cloudflare. One of those really cool stories about somebody who is just involved in tech from day one. What Coalition did was, they flipped the underwriting process on its head. They involved, infrastructure scans. They used things like Nmap, basic open source tools to just evaluate somebody's network to figure out, do you have port 3389 open? They took a technological perspective to it that both, more importantly, would get a sense of the actual exposure. And they would provide reports to insureds that said, hey, this is what's going on. I know these two companies, you have a buddy who's a law firm that also makes $1 million a year, but his premium is $5,000 and yours is $1,000. What's the difference? In the past, we, in the insurance industry, just had to say, I don't know, the underwriter was in a good mood that day. I don't know, something like that. But now we were able to provide this information because this is what was going on. We could actually point to what the actual exposure was. And also part of that was sharing information of past data breaches. A lot of this information is already online. I don't know if you've ever been to Have I Been Pwned, but it's a good time to see if your email has ever been breached. Troy Hahn over there has put together a really comprehensive database of all data breaches with all the information, everybody's email, what happened, what's been exposed, and when. I'd highly recommend going over there to check it out if you haven't had a chance. But what we did, or what they did, I should say, was compile all this information and really get a sense of what was going on in an organization. Right. So when we would share that information with the applicants, when we would share that information with their IT departments, with their CISO, CTO, whoever they engage, whether it's Chuck in a truck or their brother-in-law, everybody's got somebody that jumps in there to help with that tech. And being able to share this information made it a lot more meaningful. Right. Since then, a lot of other companies have jumped in. There were those companies, Corvus, At Bay, Cowbell is another one. They all have to find a catchy name, but they all have to take different paths as to how to kind of get to the same goal. Sharing that information, getting a better sense of the exposure, and ultimately kind of making a company a better risk. That was the ultimate perspective. Being able to share that information to kind of push people into what we call the future of cyber insurance, essentially. But from my perspective, that future it's not just about the insurance policy anymore. Before, it was another insurance policy that nobody wanted to buy. Usually there was a contract that, hey, you've got to buy this. But if we could provide those services, it changed the game entirely. So the future of cyber insurance, as I see it, is, and as it's developing right now, is kind of proactive risk management and education, the policy itself, and kind of ways to support cyber resilience, right? And kind of these themselves, that the idea of resilience and risk management could all be their entirely, dedicated presentations. There's books written about them, there's podcasts, who knows, everything you can possibly imagine. But kind of the way the industry decided to take a look at it was to incorporate all of these into one thing. And the Insurtechs were the organizations that were able to meld both insurance and technology and take that perspective because they came from that background. So from the first step is definitely that proactive risk management and education. To really kind of drive it home, what they're trying to do is just emphasize the education, really leverage the technology or leverage the information that they have to educate people. The weakest part of any network or security system is the individual. The human element is by far the weakest link in the chain. It's a common attack vector that people can use. People will always want to, again, if they see that email asking for 50 grand while their CEO's on the golf course, they're going to be motivated to a certain extent to try and make that happen because everybody wants to make that person happy. But what we found is that incorporating education and training, whether it's phishing training, whether it's understanding that, hey, you should change your password every 90 days, whether you should implement multi-factor authentication, we should do this. If you're working from home, you should probably, not download Spotify on your work computer, whatever. You shouldn't download your own personal VPN on it, what have you. It's all about education, kind of creating a culture of privacy is the buzzword that kind of latched onto to make people understand that this has to be a part of your organization from the top down. Part of that is data governance. It's about vendor management, really kind of focusing on minimizing the data, minimizing the amount of data you're storing, what you're handling, how you handle backups, and the frequency and where they're stored, all of that, and kind of reviewing vendor infrastructure to get a better understanding of what that exposure is. Really, at the end of the day, cybersecurity, it's not something that you can solve. It's not something that can be, there's no way you can win this all of a sudden. It's a risk that can be mitigated. It can be managed. That's about it. But once these kind of companies, once these insurtechs embrace that, they got a better understanding of what it actually took to train instead of just having to hire somebody outside. So again, what that did is it really played onto or got involved with the kind of the best way of managing that risk is through what the points I just shared with, and then the typical cyber insurance policy. It's great to have a policy in place, but at the same time, it's got to be the right policy. There's no such thing as the best carrier. People used to ask me constantly, like, who's the best carrier in the marketplace? Who's the best person to have your cyber insurance with? There is no one. There's no one that has the best policy in the market. There's nobody that is unstoppable when it comes to this, that, and the other. There's only really, there's the best carrier for your company and the best policy for your company or that insured or you as an individual, what have you. It really comes down to being able to evaluate the services, the coverage, everything. Generally, that requires an educated insurance agent. Again, cyber liability, diving into the policy itself is even more. It's very complicated
Mike,
things.
Can you talk a little?
Sorry.
Yeah,
keep going.
Can I ask if you could talk a little bit about? I've heard pre-breach credits, or before placing a cyber insurance policy, or maybe it's some sort of other insurance policy. The insurer would say, hey, we'll actually give you a credit if you go out and have somebody do some assessment work and a third party do some of this either penetration or whatnot. Is that common in your space? Have you heard about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, that is common depending on the carrier. It's generally focused on larger organizations that can afford to go out and get a pen test. I mean, you're looking at companies that can afford to go out and spend 15, 20 grand themselves and have a meaningful impact on their premium. In terms of education, like I said, so going back onto this, there are companies that will also say, all right, here's all the services I'm going to provide. I'm going to give you education, training. Here's some software if you want to use it. And if you take advantage of this, we'll give you a credit on your renewal. Right? As you come up for renewal, everybody's got that premium. You know, they've got to fill out the information again, and they'll see what happens. And what they'll do, and this is more common I've seen, is people saying, all right, you've done everything we've asked. You have worked with us and created a partnership, to kind of put it on the high level. We've created this partnership. We're going to reward you at the renewal. But on those larger risks, yes, you'll get credits for, you know, going out there and having a pen test on, getting an independent audit. Same time, some carriers will actually pay for it themselves. There's actually brokers out there that will pay for it if the organization is large enough. They'll pay to have somebody come out and do all this. They've got just pre-organized rates, but it's a benefit.
Yeah, cool.
Companies, it's usually companies like AIG, Chubb, the big ones that you'll see in the news, and it has to do with, you know, Merck. It's got to do with large organizations that have either had a breach or are paying 7 figures for a cyber liability premium. Because again, it's got to have some sort of meaningful impact. Yeah.
Yeah, someone's got a $10,000 policy is not going to spend $10,000 on the assessment. You know, you're not going to be able to credit the whole thing.
That's their couch cushion. That they get,
scale, right?
At the end of the day, they get to write it off. But yeah, from the small business side, where I always kind of focused was the SME space, the small space, where we're talking under 100 million in revenues, under 250 million in revenues. There's a lot of companies out there that, I mean, can't afford that. They can't afford to bear the brunt of these costs. So kind of rewarding people by using the services that the carriers give. So the carrier might spend a lot of money on providing a portal, saying, hey, here's education, here's training, here's a webinar, here's best practices, here's a sample business continuity plan. You get rewarded for using those things at renewal, or at least you should. You know, and if a carrier doesn't take that into account at the end of the year, I mean, it might be time to shop around and look for another carrier that will value kind of that time that you're putting into it. You know, it's time, it's money, it's, you know, you should be rewarded for getting involved in that.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And hey, I guess I need to drop off, but I didn't want to just drop off and you'd be like, hey, where'd that guy go? So I appreciate this conversation, Mike.
No problem. And then, yeah, I mean, my information is in there if you have any other questions, but yeah, have a good one.
Excellent. Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks. Sorry, guys, had trip out. Bye.
But yeah, so the way the policies are set up now, there's the big ones, the big costs of notification, credit monitoring, regulatory fines, and penalties. These are the ones that, I mean, you see in the news. Every time somebody's got to notify, every time you get that letter in the mail says you were part of a data breach, every time it says, hey, we'll offer you credit monitoring. These are the basics of, you know, any sort of cyber policy. But from kind of the next step, that 2.0, they started adding things like social engineering. And I had to change the colors on the slide to make it fancy and make it seem like, oh, this is a new wave and that kind of stuff and tie in with the tech. But the big thing is they've started to address the real exposures. And they could only do that once they incorporated the technology. Once they realized that, hey, like there's a lot more going on here. We should account for the fact that vendors can go down. If your vendor goes down, if your cloud provider goes down and you can't generate any revenue, that's not your fault. You have nothing to do with that. That's not a cyber event on your system. That's theirs. So we provide coverage to address that because that's an inherent portion of your product, your system, your ability to generate revenue. But the big example I was bringing is break-in coverage, essentially replacing hardware that's been permanently damaged and unusable after a cyber event. You've got property insurance policies that respond if your system catches on fire or what have you, if something blows up. I mean, my Xbox 360 was bricked 2 weeks after Christmas when I first got it. which was great. Microsoft replaced it, but at the same time, an MRI is not going to be able to be sent back to Microsoft and fixed, right? We lost someone, so I'll speed it up so you can actually. Well, real quick. So let me go through just this is what I'm talking about with the support and resiliency, right? Just building an organization that can recover quickly from cyber events, right? That's a big part of it. The impact of the cyber incident got to get you. You've got to be able to get back up and running, and these organizations and the cyber liability policies were designed to do that. All right, so that's the quick rundown. Like, is there anything I can go back and talk to you about further? Because now it's just you and me. So now I can answer all questions you have. If there's anything you want to talk about in addition to this.
Oh, no, I don't have any questions in regards to it. I'm just following along. I was interested in your thing because I am unaware of it. I mean, I do see it around. I do get those emails from time to time saying, oh, well, yeah, there's a claim here. You can take this, but it's for 75 cents. I'm like, yeah, not really worth it to me. But it's just interesting to see the sides that, I don't really hear much about, which is why I joined your session.
Yeah,
and I do plan on staying, so I'm not leaving.
Oh, thanks. No, but it's a great point. This is kind of an area where you get those letters, but nobody has any idea why.
Mm-hmm.
I only know about this because I got involved in this 12 years ago when I first started working at this small company. And kind of we all fumbled our way through it and figured out because honestly, nobody had any idea what they were doing in the industry. We were clueless. I happen to have a tech background, so I was able to convert a lot of that and kind of understand it. And a lot of it is driven by legislation. So you get those letters because they have to.
Yeah.
They've got to go through and say that, hey, there's been 500 people or more that got affected by this breach, so we need to offer you 1 year of credit monitoring that costs them $7 a year.
Yeah, I think I got something from Yahoo before, as they got a breach, and that happened. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna. They gave me an email saying, please check your password, change it, so you can do for credit. But I think Yahoo got bought out by someone else, and they're going to be taken over pretty soon. I bet you're with Microsoft for all I know.
Actually, it would make sense consolidating everything. But yeah, Yahoo had a breach of 1 billion credentials. 1 billion user accounts were impacted in a data breach with Yahoo, and it was just a disaster. But yeah, that's a huge part of those things. There's always that quote that there's two types of organizations: those that have been breached and those that will be, or those that haven't discovered it yet.
Yeah,
that's a big portion of what's going on out there. And it's the truth. But the policy itself is unique. It's different than, like your auto policy, your homeowners only responds when you get into an accident.
Mm-hmm.
When there's a boiler that explodes in your house, your homeowners responds. Most insurance policies only respond when something happens. Cyber is there on the front end. And it's there to handle the cost that you or your business is responsible for as a part of it. And that's the forensics, the credit monitoring, all that stuff that I talked about briefly, but it adds up. The average breach, if you don't have insurance, costs, I think the numbers just came out the other day, $3 million.
Yeah.
And that has a lot to do with, for the business, lost revenues, damage to brand name, and being able to get back up and running. So it's hard to quantify it all. If you're incorporating the intangibles, it's not really fair to say that, hey, this costs $3 million, but 2 million of that has to do with the damage to your brand name. Well, a lot of organizations don't even have a brand name that they can quantify. They've got a Facebook page, right? And that's it.
Yeah.
In reality, it comes down to about $500,000 to $750,000 is what people are spending to deal with these breaches long term. Most small businesses go out of business within 6 months after having a breach.
I'm sure, especially when they don't have any security or coverage.
Yeah, that's the deal. It's an interesting type of coverage. At least I find it interesting. Insurance in particular is generally boring. Like I said, I focused on what I consider to be the interesting parts. But, this slide, the resilience for security, is exactly what you just said. Sometimes people spend the money in the wrong places. They focus on buying that new thing that they saw at a conference that seems like it should be really have an impact on their security, but they don't stop to think, well, what happens if that goes down,
Mm-hmm.
right? But yeah, so I mean, what do you think? Are there any other questions or anything I can clarify? Anything I can jump on?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. It was just very interesting to hear a lot about the insurance part on those things in regards to, you know, businesses and smaller businesses because I do help out a couple small businesses on the side, but I don't even know if they have like, insurance for their security or anything in regards to that. They always go out and get that new equipment, you know. But yeah, they come to me for like technical issues on the information side for their IT, and I haven't even crossed anything like this that they would have or even mentioned it to them. So it's good to know a little bit about this just in case they ask me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of misconceptions. People think it's going to cost $5,000, $10,000, 20. It's not even the case. I mean, you
Hmm.
can get a basic policy for $500, maybe a
Hmm.
thousand bucks. And now, because like those companies that I showed in the beginning, we're talking comprehensive policies that, excuse me, will respond. That will make the company whole, make your clients, whole. And if you're the one who's going in there to repair all this stuff and help them, fix it, will he'll pay you, which is even better.
Yeah,
Especially because whenever post breach, everything that was $200 an hour is now $700 an hour.
gotcha. Yeah, it does. It does make a big difference, especially when it's like a small business and like you're saying, they'll just have like a Facebook page and then and they lose all their stuff and they have to close down because they can't pay for the after effect of what happened.
Yeah. I mean, I've been lucky to speak with some big organizations about this, like the Eagles, the Devils, um, some major corporations. But I always find it interesting when I get a chance to talk to small businesses who just, they've got a contract that says they need to have it. That's it. So
Hmm.
that's the only reason they buy it. They don't
Hmm.
realize that this is your business on the line. It's the same as if your business burned to the ground because now you can't function. The big difference is you've lost all your data. And it's a
Yeah,
shame.
yeah,
It's a shame. I mean, that's why insurance is there to kind of make you whole again after that catastrophic event.
very true.
Yeah. So that's definitely an option. I mean, if you want to propose that out there. Luckily, I'm not an insurance agent anymore, an insurance broker. I just
Yeah,
kind of help develop programs. So, and I've
gotcha.
always made it clear, like, I'm happy to help, especially because I don't make any money off of it. So people
Hmm.
are more likely to trust you when you're not selling them something.
Yeah, because you always gotta watch out for some of the salespeople. That's what I noticed. In
Yeah.
like smaller environments, because I was working with one company that had the sales guy, and he was very shady. I'm like, this business is not cracked up to what it needs to be.
Yeah. I mean, that's the deal. If somebody gives you a presentation on what the exposure is and why you should be afraid and how you can fix it, and then they happen to be the ones selling the solution, you
Well,
should
yeah,
always be,
I'll be the one
yeah,
fixing it, and the salesperson gave him like this hocus pocus. Oh, everything is good, and then we come in as tech support, and we're like, yeah, that's not happening.
yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, it was
But
interesting.
cool.
No,
Yeah,
but
if
I
there's
do
anything
appreciate
else,
it. Yeah, I do
yeah, no
appreciate it,
problem.
Mike. But that's I really don't have much questions because, like I said, this was new to me, and I do appreciate your time and effort in presenting this. So it really enlightened me in regards of security.
Yeah, it's definitely an area where the two do meet, and I've come across some interesting people that have fought it significantly.
Hmm.
Um, CISOs, I've been in meetings where the CISO sits down and just like lays it on the table. I think cyber insurance is worthless. You don't pay claims. I don't want to pay the money. It's insurance. It's a scam. And I'm like, well, thanks for having me out here today. It's been great.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's reason behind it, but like until the problem happens, most people are gonna stir away from not getting it.
Exactly. But that's all I have. Again, if you don't have any questions, I'm happy to kind of share that. My email address, if you have anything, it's going to be in all that information, but it's mike@boostinsurance.io if I can help you with
Gotcha.
anything else.
I do
But
appreciate your time, but like I said, I'm good to go. I have no questions.
perfect. what I like to hear, because you always find questions later. So
Yeah,
feel
that's
free to
very
reach out to
true. And
Owen,
yeah,
me,
no,
whoever.
I do appreciate you providing your contact information. And if it comes to be it, I'll definitely look into it. And if the small businesses or even anybody I talk to, I'll surely spread the word.
Yeah, I mean, there's where are you at? Are you in Newtown?
I am at the Newtown campus. In regards to Bucks County Community College, I work in the accessibility department in the
Okay.
IT world.
Yeah, there's a
So,
lot of agents in the area that can help out if you got any clients, you just want to shoot them over there, so you're good to go. But
mhm.
yeah, other than that, have a good day. Thanks for
All right.
coming.